So yeah, today we are joined by Nate Solon. He is a a chessable author, FIDE master, very strong chess player, blogger, and chess teacher. So thank you for joining us today, Nate. How's it going?
It's going great. Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, of course. And we wanted to for sure touch on openings because at Chess Goals we love doing short and sweet opening courses that are still going to cover basically everything that you're going to see in normal games. And I was going through some of your chessable courses, and you also have a ready repertoire, a Nimzowitsch Sicilian repertoire. But what's great about those is that there are 100 lines total. So talk about why you wanted to keep your openings of roughly 100 lines.
Yeah, I definitely wanted to make them very short and digestible because I do a lot of one-on-one coaching, and what I find is it's just really hard for most players to manage remembering a huge number of lines. Something that happens to me all the time is I'll know that someone is following a specific chessable course, and we reviewing their games, and it'll be like move six, and I'm like, oh, so you didn't follow the course here, and they're like, what? Like they never know. And these are like 1800, 1900, 2000, like good chess players. Um, but it's just very difficult for people to remember all this. Uh, so my philosophy is more, let's keep it simple, but really know what you know. So when I started creating those courses, Chessable was just rolling out these 100 repertoires. So I thought, okay, this is a perfect fit. Even I think 100 lines is even kind of a lot for a lot of people, but I definitely wouldn't want to go higher with that as a starting point.
So, as a general reference, Nate, do you feel like 100 lines for white is pretty good and maybe 100 for black? Or what would you say is kind of optimal for, let's say, a 1600 club level type player?
Yeah, the way I've structured, so my first course was that ready, and that's a complete repertoire for white, starting with one knight f3, obviously, and that is 100 lines. And then when I started digging into the black side, what I decided to do is to split it into two. So I've got that black course with the Nimzowitsch Sicilian versus one e4, which is 100 lines, and then the final one, which I'm working on right now, which will hopefully be out soon, is black versus everything but e4. So I split it like that because I do tend to feel like you've got a little bit of a tougher job in the opening as black because just the first move advantage. Your opponent can put more pressure on you. With white, often even if you don't know your stuff, you get a decent position. You get to play a game. With black, if you don't know what you're doing, you can really get run over. So I do feel like it makes sense to put, if you're thinking about like your time studying the opening, like devote a little more time to the black side. And then the way I split it into e4 and everything else is e4 is the most common first move for sure in the stats. And actually the lower you are currently on the rating ladder, the more you're going to tend to face e4. Like at the lower levels, it's like way more than 50%. As you go up, you're going to start to see d4 and then c4 and knight f3 a little bit more often, but e4 remains the most common move at all levels. So basically, and e4 is pretty much its own beast, whereas d4 and knight f3 and c4 all transpose very easily. So ultimately that was the way it made the most sense for me. It's like, let's do a whole course just tackling e4 as black because it's really important to be really solid there. And then we'll do a third course that's everything else. And then the three together is like a complete repertoire for both sides.
That sounds exactly like kind of
Yeah.
how we structured our main three courses too. We have an E4 course, 100 lines, a Caro course for black, about 100 lines, and then a Slav course, which covers knight f3 and c4, and sometimes transposes to our Caro course.
Yeah, very similar structure. Well, completely different openings, but the overall structural framework is the same. Which I think sometimes with chess coaching, it's like some things just make sense. So like two people can create the same thing independently. It's like, well, there's just like logic to this that if you understand chess, you're going to arrive at something like this.
Yeah, and your knight f3 course, I imagine you have a lot of positions where you just need to understand. Okay, this is I don't know exactly if you go into like double fianchetto against the Queen's Gambit decline, but you could say, okay, you have to just know this double fianchetto position or this Catalan position. the specific ready position. It's not the same as saying, oh, we're going into the open Sicilian as white. And you have to know all of this theory in the open Sicilian. So, I mean, 100 lines, I think, makes sense, and it's digestible for students.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not as sharp move by move as something like an open Sicilian, but the great thing about those lines is they're relatively safe, right? Because I'm recommending you play knight f3, g3, bishop g2, castles, not against, of course, chess is a two-player game, so you always have to be aware of what your opponent's doing, but that's sort of the blueprint. So you get your king side developed, you get your king safe. It can be very hard for your opponent to attack your king. So it's quite safe, but it's also a lot of the positions are deceptively venomous for black because you get all these positions where like if you don't know the opening, it looks normal and close to equal, but you might just have something like white's got that bishop on g2 and black's bishop is on c8. And like as you start to look deeper, you're like, if you have the black pieces, you're like, wait, like it's impossible for me to ever move this bishop. And like maybe a lot of pieces have been trading. I don't have any obvious weaknesses, but like the more I think about it, my position is just brutal. So you can sort of lull someone into a false sense of security with some of those lines.
Yeah, and in our Caro course too, we get a lot of that. It's like it's such a timid opening, like you're not even really fighting for the center right away. You play like a quiet c6, but then if you just play normal moves, you'll end up with a backward pawn that can be very easily attacked, like either your like e4 or like d4 pawn or whatever. And it's like people will get into this position where they're with white and defending, and they don't even really know how they got there. But there's like fighting for their lives. But I was going to say something else too about splitting up the black courses, like a course against e4 and d4. What I love about that is I play these like tournaments where you play one slow game a week, and you kind of know what your opponent is, an e4 player or d4 player, so you only have to study half your repertoire. You don't have to go through everything. So that's another benefit of splitting it up too.
Yeah, that's definitely nice if you know what to expect, you can sort of target your opponent.
And I like to, Nate, I'm looking at your page for the Knight F3 course, for the Ready course, and you have reason number 1 why you should play one Knight F3, and I love this stat. It's only played in 5% of games. So your opponent with the black pieces has probably only seen it 5 times out of every 100 games.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in the value of surprise in the opening. I think that's absolutely a real thing. Play on your home turf and take your opponent, essentially give yourself home field advantage. So, yeah, like exploiting the value of surprise in a lot of different ways is I think a great strategy. And what I really loved about Knight F3 is, first of all, you do it on move 1. So there's a value to surprising your opponent before they surprise you. You take the game onto your territory immediately. And the other thing is, I would argue that Knight F3 is not even a worse move than E4. Like, often there's a tension in opening preparation between playing good moves and surprising your opponent, right? To surprise them, you might have to play an inferior move, but you hope they don't know it. But I was also looking at, if you look at the AlphaZero papers, they have these, the sort of evolution of the first moves. And they retrained it from scratch a few times. It's somewhat random. But basically, it thinks Knight F3 is more or less as good as E4. So it's, these like superhuman AIs we have are saying, yeah, these moves are about the same in like objective value. But in chess history, and even still today, like everyone plays E4. So I think historically we've been like a little bit dogmatic. Like E4 is kind of the most obvious move, but even objectively, it's not necessarily better than D4 or Knight F3 or C4 or other first moves you can play.
That's interesting to me, Nate, because I work in statistics.
Yeah, I know. Well, yeah, we can probably talk about that since I know that we both share an interest there.
And in your background's in data science, I've always thought it would be interesting to have a chess engine that says here's a list of moves. Instead of giving an eval with best play and centipons, what's the best chance for you to maximize your advantage in terms of expected value in this game based on your rating, your opponent's rating, and the time control. So almost like what AlphaZero or Leela Chess does, where they give those percentages, but somehow base it on the level of the players. Because I would imagine a move like Knight F3 would tend to score better than pawn to e4, for example, at the club
Yeah,
level.
well, that was one of my motivations for doing the course as well. Is if you just look in those Lichess stats that you can just pull up in the opening explorer in Lichess, yeah, knight f3 does score better. Now, there may be a caveat there of like I think those stats can be biased in some ways. Like for example, if the players who play knight f3 are on average stronger, then knight f3 is going to score better, not because it's necessarily a better move, but because the players who are playing it are better. So you do have to take those with a grain of salt. But if you just open up that tab and look at the numbers, like yeah, they are a little bit higher for knight f3.
And do you see that at all levels for Knight F3? Because that's what I've sort of noticed in the database. Even at the highest levels, or if you look at just Titled Tuesday games, for example, Knight F3 always seems to score the best.
I haven't looked as much at the higher level. Like when I'm making these chessable courses, um, I'm kind of envisioning like a club player, in that sort of 1600 to 1800 range. So I
Hmm.
select my Lichess filters to approximate that type of player, and that's what I look at the most. Although I do, the lines are they're not unsound lines; they're tested lines. And I even something that's really funny about it actually is when I make these courses, if I'm going to go play an OTB tournament, then I use the lines for my course because right, like I'm a dad, I'm doing coach, I don't have the time to like prepare a completely different repertoire for myself
Yeah.
than my course. So I just use the course lines. Um, but what's been crazy, at first I was scared that I'm going to be such a sitting duck because literally my entire repertoire is out there. I'm trying to tell I'm like, hey, I've got this repertoire. Like, check out my repertoire. Come buy my repertoire. And then I sit down and play someone, and they're gonna know that. I really have not had like any problem with that. I've just used, and I'm not doing any like funny business where I play it a different way or I change my lines. I'm literally playing the lines that are in the course, and I've had great results with that. I really haven't had any problems with like people targeting me.
It's like a reverse psychology where everyone thinks you're going to mix it up and you just play the exact same lines. Uh, yeah, I was listening to your podcast with Ben Johnson, and you were just coming off the
Mhm.
tournament of the Alto tournament, at least
Mhm.
21. And you said in that episode that you just basically played your ready repertoire, and it was good enough to win the tournament, and that was against like very strong players, right?
Yeah, so I used for that was last year. I used my ready repertoire with white. And I had in the first round, I think I played against a player who was like 2000, and I got a great position and won a smooth game. I played Alonso Zapata, who's a grandmaster.
Hmm.
People might know him for this famous game where he beat Vishy Anand in like 6 moves. I don't know if you
Oh,
do you guys know
that's
that?
him.
Yeah, so there's this like sort of famous or infamous game where Vishy mixed up his moves in I think it was a Petrov, and he's got this story where he describes, he figures out like, okay, if I resign and leave the tournament hall right now, like for the next few hours, everyone will think the game was just a quick draw and I don't have to talk to anyone. So so anyways, that was Alonso Zapata. He against him, he actually went into like an old Indian, so that's quite rare. So that's not even something I cover very heavily, but I mean, I would say it's a pretty crappy opening for black. So like, if he felt that was his best option, I was happy with that. And then in the last round, I had white against Dina Belankaya, who's obviously super famous player and like a really strong player, like Soviet School of Chess and all that. And yeah, again, I just used a line from the course. She wasn't very well prepared in it. I got a nice advantage, so it worked really well.
Yeah, and you also played Todd Bryant in that tournament too, right?
Yes, Todd, I had black. That's funny too because so against Todd I had black and also what I'm getting to is that's I even played another alto more reason that was like the previous one. Then the next
Oh,
one
sure.
is interesting too. But I had black against Todd. Uh we were roommates. So it was quite funny because like before the round we were each sitting on our hotel bed with like our laptops out. I'm like, don't look at my laptop, in that case he kind of got one step ahead of me because I knew his like online handles, And he's like a big like E4 open Sicilian guy. So I had a Sicilian planned as black, but he actually played an anti-Sicilian that he had never played in the accounts that I knew about. So he got a good position, but I did manage to draw that game. But then, okay, the most recent Alto, I mean, same story. So this one now, I use my Nimzovich Sicilian. That my other course, um, I had I think that only happened in one game, but I had black against a young woman, like 2300 in, so this is the opponent everyone is terrified of, right? Like the young Indian player, like quickly improving, like very good. And I played the Nimzovich Sicilian again for my course. Now, the Nimzovich Sicilian is a lot riskier than the ready because when you play black, if you want to spice things up, sometimes you have to take a bit of a risk. So like the ready, it's not popular. It's also super safe. Nimzovich Sicilian is really risky. And she played the first few moves very quickly. So I was like, this is finally it. This is when I'm going to get punished for having all my preparation out in the open. Um, but then, soon enough, she slowed down. She chose like a less critical option, which is something that I see a lot. It's like she went for a line that, like when strong players get to a certain point and they realize, oh, I'm not prepared here. This is sort of a side road that they go down. But then she fell into a trap that I've actually played like many times in Blitz. So I won a pawn out of the opening. So yeah, so far I've really not been punished for this stuff.
That's great. One other thing you said on the Ben Johnson podcast is that you like to use Blitz to improve. And that is actually something that we have been harping on for a long, long time. So, how do you use Blitz for chess improvement in general?
Yeah, absolutely. I saw one of your guys' articles because I write a column in New and Chess magazine, and I had one. I think the title was "Actually Blitz is good for the chess, is good for your chess." Because what I've noticed is like people are almost ashamed to, it's like they'll say in like a whisper. They don't even, as a coach, if I make them keep a study log, like they won't even put Blitz in their study log, and I'm like, well, it's like this looks great, but I think you should be playing more chess. And they're like, oh yeah, well I do play some Blitz. I'm like I think Blitz is just, like I think we should embrace Blitz. Like you get to play a lot of games really fast. You can play a lot of chess. That's good. But it's still almost stigmatized. So I would say for me that the keys to using Blitz to improve and not just to procrastinate or blow off steam or whatever are number one is you got to decide in advance how many games you're going to play and stick to it. So for me, like with two kids, if something's not on my calendar, it's just not going to happen. So like if I'm playing Blitz, like it's on my calendar. I want to be playing Blitz. I've decided to play Blitz. I'm not just randomly playing like 4 hours of Blitz. Yeah. So number one is decide how many games you're going to play. That also helps prevent tilt, where you're like chasing those rating losses and playing some sort of run-on session. And then number two is, of course, you have to review the games. That's really a huge part of the value is just to get that raw material for review. So if you're not reviewing them, you're really missing out probably on most of at least the learning value. Maybe you're still having fun. That's cool. But if you want to use it as like a study tool, you've got to review the games.
And what does your review look like for a Blitz game?
I do. For me, the length and intensity of review is going to be calibrated to the length of the game. So if I play an over the board game that lasts 4 hours, then I'll be motivated to do like a deeper, more introspective review where I start with the engine off, really try to figure things out myself. For Blitz, it's going to be much more quick and dirty. So I am using the engine. I the acronym I use for my process is OBIT. So O openings. I check the opening and update my files. So we can definitely talk about that a bit more because that's also updating my files based on my games is like a huge part of my process. And I'm about to launch this live course where I'm going to teach people how to do that process. B, blunders. Definitely want to identify and make sure you understand any blunders. I is interesting. So for a Blitz game, I'm not going to go through the entire game move by move in depth, but I'll pick like one interesting moment. So was there a moment in the game where you got stuck, let's say it was a 5-minute game and you spent a minute and a half on one move? well, like clearly that's not really good time usage for that time control. So it's like go back, what was about what about that position was so challenging? That could be interesting. Or it could be, maybe you faced one of two paths, you're choosing between two moves and you didn't know. But, just pick one moment to go a bit deeper where maybe I'll click around a little bit more with the engine and just like try to understand if I face that situation again, like how should I really be thinking about this position? And then T is takeaway, which is like one key takeaway from the game. And I do like I suggest people to save your game like you can save all the games in one place, whether it's a Lee Chess Study or a chess-based database, and then you can kind of go back and maybe periodically look at all those takeaways and kind of think, okay, are a lot of my losses actually really down to the same kind of mistake over and over? And, maybe I need to adjust my study plan to like address that.
I really like that process. There was a stretch where I had a spreadsheet of my takeaways, and it was surprising how quickly I would start to find similarities in Blitz. Like one of my takeaways was I would trade queens too often. Anytime there was a queen trade, I would go for it, and it was almost always the bad move. Or another one was I wouldn't develop my pieces quickly enough. I was moving pieces 2-3 times, and it sounded very basic, but it was just happening over and over, and they tended to be mistakes. But so yeah, I like that process a lot.
Yeah, and I think another thing about Blitz is whether you're playing classical or Blitz, you're the same chess player. So for most people, the categories or kinds of mistakes they make are going to be largely the same, regardless of the time control. And Blitz might even expose those weaknesses faster because it's kind of stress testing you. You don't have enough time to think and cover up for whatever mistakes there are in your intuition. So you're going to emerge even more quickly and you're going to know what you need to work on. So I think that's like, there's value in going deep in a single game in review, but there's also a lot of value in going wide across those games and finding the patterns, which I think that's what a lot of people are missing that. And so there's these patterns hiding in plain sight that they're not noticing.
And I found too, just in OTB events, especially at my level, a ton of games are decided like in the last 5 minutes. Like that's basically blitz chess. And if you're in a complicated endgame and you're a really strong blitz player, you're going to have a huge edge there, even if your opponent is really highly rated. It's like when you get down to that like 5 minutes, even with an increment, it's like that seems like no time over the board. But if you're used to it, it's like you're gonna at least not panic and have a good chance to like steal a game or a half a point there or something. But yeah, we have a general rule for chess improvement. It's like you should spend about 80% of your time playing and 20% of your time studying or reading or whatever. And you can only play so much classical because it gets kind of like long and boring, but you can just play a bunch of blitz. And as long as you're doing it in a good way, I feel like you get to see there's just something about seeing these same positions over and over out of your openings that helps you like come up with plans or even like internalize which plans didn't work in certain positions. And yeah, if you're like analyzing and figuring out what went wrong in these games, it's going to go so far and you don't even have to play like a 60-minute game or anything like that.
Yeah, I think that the value of playing is maybe underappreciated because with these online chess sites, you can literally play chess 24/7 if you want to. So if you think about practicing chess and what activities you're going to do, well, you could be playing and you're practicing exactly what you want to do. So every other way of studying has to be compared against this opportunity cost of, wait, why exactly is this better than playing chess? And I think that's like a higher bar to meet than people generally appreciate.
Yeah, there's this great video from Kostya from Chess Dojo. I don't know, we're saying like everything against what they teach, but he has a great video about skill versus knowledge. It's like you can have a ton of head knowledge, but if you can't actually apply it on the board, your rating is always going to be a lagging indicator. So I think we should be trying to push up that skill up to the, like as close as you are to knowledge, so your rating is like at its peak for what like how good you actually are at the game. And so many people, especially in our community, not to call anyone out, but they'll study chess for 10, 15 hours a week and play like a 5-minute blitz game for the whole week. And that's just so backwards.
Yeah, I encounter this a lot too because most of my students are adults, and the kind of people who find me tend to be the kind of people who are going to be studying a lot. Often I've had this experience over and over where the first session, I'm like, okay, so what are you working on? And it's like, the number of books and courses, it's like 6 or 8 or 10 things. I'm like, how do you even remember all the things you're studying? Like unless you're actually studying chess for like 6 hours a day, like this is just so unmanageable. So I try to get people to stick to just one book or course at a time. Find it's very hard to convince people to do that. But even if we can chip it down from six to like 2 or 3, it's more manageable.
So let's say you have an adult student who has 7 hours a week to spend on chess. How would you break that down in terms of playing games, analysis, and other resources?
Yeah, right now the framework I'm using is I've got it divided into 4 pillars, which are play, review, solve, and learn. So play, obviously, play games. Review those games. Some people would put those in the same box. It's just slightly different ways of doing it. Solve, like solving tactics or exercises, and then learn is learn something new. And I tend to think in terms of having a roughly equal balance of all of those. And like, you can kind of disagree about I mean, I certainly don't know what's optimal. I don't know if there is like such a thing as optimal in chess. It's very hard to say. But I think what you got to watch out for, you just don't want to be zero in any of those categories. So if you have a preference of like, I enjoy playing more or I enjoy studying more, I think it's fine to like, do what you enjoy. Because again, generally the people I'm working with, they're not like chess professionals. They're not like relying on winning chess tournaments for their income or anything. So it's like, yeah, do what you like. But if you've got zero in one of these categories, that's something to look at. Because I think it's not even so much about the balance, it's about the feedback cycle between when you play, you get the practice and you get ideas of what to study, and then when you study, you learn things to apply that sort of so ideally it creates this circle where everything's feeding into each other, and you can have different time, kind of rebalance the time and it's fine. But if you're not doing any playing or you're not doing any studying, then that sort of virtuous cycle just isn't happening.
And could working with a coach replace let's say, the learning pillar?
Yeah, I mean, depending on the coach, like if your coach has thematic or conceptual lessons, I think you could use a coach for that. Coach is obviously great for game. I would say the sort of most straightforward thing that a coach can help you with is game review. In that, if you have access to a coach, or like even someone who's not necessarily trained as a coach but is just a strong chess player, and you just have like another pair of eyes, and you just can just say like, hey, well, like I didn't really know what to do in this position. Like, how would you think about this position? That's super valuable.
Yeah, so you have a very big blog here, zavishensvug.substack.com. We will link that. Don't try to spell it, but
Yeah, perhaps
you
from a
have
marketing perspective, I don't I should have chose something different. Although I don't know, there's an insanely popular blog called Stratechery.
oh yeah, I've heard of that.
Uh, so that's like the worst title ever, but like that guy is amazing. So maybe it doesn't matter that much anyway.
But you have your 4 principles for chess improvement. Simple beats optimal, consistency beats intensity. What you can do is better than what you know, and how you study is better than what you study. So we'll link that in the show notes. But how did you come up with these 4 principles?
Yeah, I came up with those. I recently did a free study plan workshop, so sort of kicking off the new year. I was like, okay, well let's just like do something to help people get like their study plan locked in, and those were the general principles I came up with, and yeah, those really grew out of just working with one-on-one students and seeing like where people were struggling and where they could adjust, and also I like to take things from outside of chess as well, because like obviously within the chess community we're good at chess, but I feel like we are not necessarily the best at like structuring a training plan or you know maximizing your time or things like this. So for example, consistency beats intensity. um, if you are training your body, and doing workouts, that is something you'll often hear. They're like, consistency is the key. So I think the same thing applies to chess, but maybe we don't appreciate it that much.
Yep. And if you want a free study plan, go to chessgoals.com/study plan, and we have one there for you. But based on everything you're saying, I'm sure we're very similar in how we would structure things. But there's a lot of parallels between improving in chess and improving in fitness. I especially like the consistency beats intensity. It's like if you do at least something every day versus just like a 4-hour gym session on like some random Saturday, you're gonna have way better results. It's like stacking that on top of each other over and over. I think that's a principle that transcends chess and chess itself.
Yeah, for sure. And it's often when you see what people are doing who are having success, it's often quite simple. Like there's just this, I think his name's Mark Hyman, who was just on Perpetual Chess, who got the Grandmaster title, and his study plan, basically he was playing Blitz and he was playing over the board tournaments and not much else. And you do always have to like keep in, not everyone is the same. And I think we also like a lot of sort of adult improvers want to minimize the role of talent. I think talent's a real thing. It comes easier for some people than others. So you can't just look at what Magnus does and say, okay, this is the path. But then at the same time, if you look at what people are doing who are successful, yeah, it's often not that complicated. There's often an element of playfulness to it. It's not like this massive spreadsheet with like 40 columns or something.
Yeah, yeah, Matt.
Sorry.
Matt loves spreadsheets. Yeah, when people ask our number one chess improvement tip, it's always the same as like enjoy what you're doing. Because if you don't enjoy it, you're never going to stick with it, and it does take time. You're not going to get 2,000 overnight.
And I think that's interesting because Nate was talking about how he works with a lot of adult improvers and how they like to study versus play. You think of kids who play chess, they really just love the game and they are constantly playing. They play every OTB event they can get their parents to take them to. They're on their phones constantly. And I think that's something where if adults can find that same passion for chess, they're going to just naturally find probably that they're playing chess as much or more often as their study work.
It's actually really funny contrasting my adult and because I have more adult students, but I have some kids as well. And yeah, some of these kids have been on a tear recently. It's like I've got these kids who it's like every time I see them, they've gained like 100 rating points. And I asked one, I was like, so what are you doing? He's like, what do you mean? I'm like, it seems like you're gaining like 100 points a month. Like, what do you attribute that to? Like, what are you doing right now? And he's like, oh, like, playing chess. I'm like, okay, cool. Like, well, well, he's like, he was kind of confused by the question. He's like, well, I do a puzzle rush sometimes. um, whereas, like with some of my adults, it's like they have the plans and the spreadsheet, but they're scraping and clawing for those points. So, yeah, I mean, there's probably something to be said for like brain plasticity and having fewer life responsibilities as well. But it's just funny to like interact with these people at different points in their life and like they're approaching chess in different ways.
Yeah, I was going to say the kids like I played 1,000 games this month.
Yeah. But if you go back in time to anyone who is like one of the top players, if you go to their FIDE page, like when they're kids, they are playing all the time. Like if you go back to Fabi, he has months where he has like 25 games, 31 games, 22 games, 27, 42. It's like they're just playing all the time. This is something that Andrew Tang, fellow Minnesotan Andrew Tang, when he made Grandmaster, I remember he was doing some stream and someone asked him like, so how did you get like so good basically? Like, how'd you do? And he's like, yeah, it's really just like playing and analyzing the games. And that's all he did. But he played a lot. Obviously he played blindfolded hyper bullet and it was no problem, but he's playing a lot and analyzing his games. And that's like how he got better. I think, sometimes we overcomplicate it.
Yeah, for sure. And that's another thing that I love about Blitz is there is an element of volume to this, right? It's like quantity has a quality all its own. If you're starting as an adult, there's just no way you're really going to be able to play that volume of OTB games. I mean, each one of those games takes multiple hours. Like how many games can you possibly play? So I think to get the volume you need, you're going to need some of those blitz or, maybe rapid games, but if you're just like one OTB game a week, you're just not really going to see enough patterns and positions to get there.
Yeah, and if you're spending a lot of time studying all of your opening lines and you're playing one game a week, it's not the best use of your time probably because you're not seeing any of those opening lines.
Yeah, if you don't encounter them, it seems to be like in one ear and out the other. Which maybe that's a good time to just briefly talk about this course that I'm about to launch in, I guess it'll be like a week from when the podcast comes out. So this is like quite experimental. I haven't done this before. But basically I'm taking, more or less the same lines in research that I'm working on for this chessable course. And I'm also doing a live course where it's going to be 6 weeks. We're going to meet once per week for a Zoom lesson. There's going to be like a Discord as well. But the idea is to really walk you through the process that I would use to prepare my own openings, which if I had to say it in one sentence, it would be learn by playing. So, I don't really believe in memorize 1,000 lines before you play. That hasn't worked for me. I don't think it works for most people. So what I like to do is let's get as quickly as possible, get it to a point where we can play it, at least in Blitz, maybe not in your highest stakes over the board tournament, but at least in an online Blitz or Rapid game, we can start playing it. And then you start polishing it and refining it. Every game, my rule is every game, update it to the first move you would have played differently. And what you find is if you actually do that, it doesn't really take that many cycles of it before you start to really polish that repertoire to where it's in a good place. And there are just like, there's a few things where it's like, to do this, I think it's essential to have opening files. Like, just meaning you have to have a document that you can update and refer to, because it's just impossible to keep track of everything in your head. But basically, you can just by playing and updating, quickly you get to a point where it's working really well, and then it's relevant for you because you're updating based on things that you actually encounter in real games, and it tends to be much more memorable because then when you get to the over the board game, it's such a good feeling if you get a position on the board that you've had in Blitz, because you're going to remember like, oh yeah, this happened. I did this, which was a mistake. You're going to know why. You're going to know the update. And then you get to this point, which I think a lot of people have never even been to. But once you get there, you're like, oh, this is what I want my opening preparation to look like, which is you kind of have these templates and blueprints of ways to beat people where it's not even hard because you just see, you can see it come. You're like, oh, yeah, this is what they always do. It's this intuitive move that looks good, but it's actually wrong. And here's how I always crush them. And, sometimes you don't even have to do hardly any work because it's like, well, yeah, I won 20 Blitz games just like this. So, I know how to do this. No problem.
It's like the one where you want a pawn, right? In the Sicilian.
Yeah, exactly. It was like this, it literally has so many Blitz games with, it's actually the same pattern. Although what was funny is, she got an even worse sort of unfortunate for her. Like we had the same position I had encountered, many times in Blitz, but a pawn move for each side had been inserted that actually made it much worse for her. So it was like, this is somewhat randomly, it was like even like a much better version for me than I had in Blitz.
Yeah, nice. And a good thing too about doing kind of like the play-based method too is you get a sense pretty quick if you just kind of hate the opening and you can abandon it without investing like 20 hours of study too.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's like, I would call that like prototyping. Like, play it. See, before you learn the 1,000 lines or whatever. Let's like, do you even like these positions?
Yeah, I had that with a Banco course once, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going to be all like gambity, and then I got these positions. I'm like, I have no idea where I'm at, and so I just abandoned the whole thing. I'll just play the Slav instead.
Yeah,
that actually.
Oh, go ahead, Matt.
I was going to say that brings up a question that I was wondering when you were talking about your courses earlier, Nate. Have you announced yet what your defense will be against d4 and other moves for white?
For my black course versus d4.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's based on the semislav.
Okay.
So that's what I'm playing against d4, and against knight f3 and c4 in various lines, you can get this set up with d5 and c6 and e6. And the reason I chose the semi-Slav, it's kind of a departure from my previous courses, right? Because we talked about the value of surprise in the opening. And there's two ways you can go about that if you want to get surprised. You can start out with something weird right off the bat, or you can play something more mainstream and play it in a different way. So the first two courses are like right off the bat, I'm playing like something unusual. The semi-Slav is really the other approach. Obviously, the semi-Slav is a mainline opening. It's like a very legit opening, that's played at all, grandmaster level and everything. But in this case, I've got some twists a little bit later on. I'm just playing it in a different way. So what I like about the semi-Slav, one is that like that setup is flexible. So to fit this in 100 lines, I knew I had to be able to use a lot of the same setups and ideas. I can't try to teach everyone like a completely different setup with totally different pawn structures against every white move. And I also think the semi-Slav is a nice balance of solid but yet dynamic. Like you're starting off with a really solid control of the center, but the position often explodes and you can play really aggressively and dynamically. And I was also excited to recommend the Botvinnik, which is, this variation of the semi-Slav where you take the pawn on c4, you defend it, there's sort of this temporary piece sacrifice thing. It's like a very wild, exciting line. And a lot of people are intimidated by it. And so I also knew, when you're making these chessable courses, you want to, as much as possible, not retread the same things other people have done. So there's a bunch of semi-Slav courses on chessable, but for the most part, they've avoided the Botvinnik, which is like, to me, is like the most exciting line. That's like I'm the most excited to play. And I think is the reason is that like a lot of these courses are created by grandmasters, and if a grandmaster plays into the semi-Slav, like you can be pretty sure they are like booked up to the teeth. But if your opponents are not, if your opponents are club players, they might not, depending on what level you're at, they might even not even know they're allowing the Botvinnik. So I don't think
Yeah.
you have to be like so terrified of your opponent's preparation. And again, looking at the stats, Botvinnik scores really well. These quieter options where you essentially are transposing back into like a Queen's Gambit declined score much better for white. And like, for me, that totally makes sense based on the patterns that I see in various openings, which is you tend to score better if you present your opponent with unusual problems early in the opening. If you allow your opponent to just get a good position by following basic opening principles of developing and controlling the center, if you're playing anywhere above a beginner opening, your opponent's probably going to be able to handle that. And then you're going to have some more work to do to beat them. But if you present them with like a very unusual problem on move 8 or something that they can't just solve by obvious developing moves, you might gain a big advantage, or at the very least, you might gain an advantage on the clock or kind of take them out of their comfort zone and start to get them off balance.
I like that you say that because so we recommend in our Slav course the triangle formation to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
And if white starts out with their pawns on d4 and c4, brings both knights to the center, we capture on c4. And we go into what's called the note boom variation.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very similar. In Lichess, the note boom scores very well for black. And I think it's because as black, you just have to sort of know maybe like 6 to 8 moves, kind of how you hold on to the pawn. And then you get really used to the pawn structure when you play all your Blitz games. And white didn't even realize that they're sacrificing the pawn in that way. They're just used to other lines in the Queen's Gambit.
Yeah, absolutely. So philosophically, your approach is similar to mine. It's just the specifics are a little bit different because you're going to be playing e6 first. I'm going to be playing knight f6 first. Mm-hmm. So of course, the downside for you guys is you're allowing the Marshall Gambit, which objectively is fine for black, but super sharp. So you probably, well, again, like most people, like I think this whole thing of worrying about your opponent's preparation is like massively overblown. Like most people's opening preparation is a mess. So like realistically, your opponents will not be that prepared. But in theory, if your opponent is super booked up in the Marshall Gambit, you better know what you're doing.
Yeah. I think we have like 10 lines on the Marshall just to get you through that territory.
But yeah, I love that approach too. And like the note boom, that's a philosophy of the opening that I love, because you're trying to gain an advantage not with an opening trap, but by channeling the game into a strategically non-standard position that you're going to know how to handle. So yeah, that's philosophically, that's an approach I really like as well.
And we also go with the Stonewall Dutch in that course, which is not the best opening according to the engine or GM play, but a lot of players from the white side don't like facing the Stonewall, and I think I want to say it scored pretty well in the Lead Chess databases too for lower ratings.
Yeah, and it can be, I find often what's more consequential than if the position is like 0 or plus zero point 0.4 according to the engine is like, do you have a clear plan, right? And the Stonewall's one where probably you can play like 94 and you start shifting some pieces over to the king side, and if you prepared well, you should have a pretty clear idea of what you're doing. And for white, maybe it's not, if they're not prepared for that, it's not so obvious what they're trying to accomplish.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we have very plan-based repertoires too, where every single opening, line ends with a plan, and we try to keep the plans like we'll often play like the second or third best move just to kind of get into a similar position, so you don't have to memorize everything. So that's another like principle of the ChessGoals courses. And you said this course for Chessable, your new one is coming out in like a month or two around there?
Yeah, there's not a specific date yet. I still need to wrap some things up and record the videos, and then it's just based on Chessable's release schedule. But I'm hoping it's out there within a few months. And yeah, this live version of the course that I'm doing is starting just in a week from now.
Okay, awesome. We will for sure link that in the description, so go check that out for sure.
Maybe we could talk about Nate's thoughts on the future of top-level chess. Like, where does he see the landscape in 5 years, 10 years? Who's going to be at the top?
Sure, yeah. Well, yeah, if you want to get into, I mean, I don't know. I feel like it's in a fascinating place right now where, well, obviously Gukesh is ascendant at the moment, and I mean, one thing that's fascinating is like Gukesh is world champion. He might not even be the best young Indian player. Like Eric Geisty is doing these amazing things in open tournaments. Is like he's sort of managed to miss the world championship qualification schedule by a hair in all these different ways. But he's also playing amazing. So
yeah, he's getting creamed at Tata Steel right now. But we went through the 2024 like overall ratings, and he had over 100. It's like 130 games, and he was very clearly in the 2800s. So you just got to think that he's going to be right there at the very top for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, there might be some adjustment necessary for him, right? Because he was doing it largely in these open tournaments, where to achieve that kind of performance, he just has to be crushing like 25 to 2600 GMs, like essentially every game. And that requires a certain kind of style and like opening choices. That's probably pretty different than, okay, now you're going up against 2,700 players. So maybe he'll have to adjust to that. I don't know. But certainly, I mean, India has a lot of bullets in the chamber with Gukesh and Eric Geising. We haven't even talked about Prague yet. And so just all these amazing talents.
Yeah, like if you're going to draft an Olympia Dynasty team, like a Chess Olympiad Dynasty team, it's like all the Indian players you would pick in the top three. Like Eric Geisy, Gukesh, Prague. It's like your top three right there. Yeah. And then in the Tata... Oh, what's that?
I was just... And of course, they dominated the Olympiad, very confidently.
Oh, yeah. And then you may even just throw Vichy in there because he's like unstoppable and never goes down in rating.
Yes.
Yeah, so exciting times. But what I like about Gukesh is he's leading the Tata Steel tournament now, and he obviously won the world championship. But it feels like, again, we have the right world champ outside of Magnus. Like, Gukesh has proved himself. I hope that he pulls through and finishes Tata Steel on top. It's like really feels like we have a real world championship again. World champion, I should say.
You know what's something that's fascinating to me is we've got this whole chess boom, right? Where the numbers of people playing chess, all the numbers are going up and up and up. That's happened essentially with no contribution from the World Championship, like as a title, as a brand, which is like
Yeah.
the most iconic thing in chess. But we had like all these years of Ding, like, no shade on Ding. Like, clearly he's an amazing player. He earned that accomplishment. He can do whatever he wants, but he's just someone who never really seemed to be interested in like marketing himself. Um, After he won the World Championship, he had seemingly a lot of struggles with like his health and his mental health. So he's really like essentially this entire World Championship title and cycle. There's just not much going on, and even the Ding Gukesh World Championship match was not even being covered for most of it by like major Western media outlets or newspapers. So it's sort of, I've got to think that like some of these other powers that be, like chess.com, are kind of looking at this and saying like, hey, like we could do a great job with like a world championship.
Hmm.
So I think you're already sort of seeing some conflicts and some rumblings, like with like Gene's Gate, but I would kind of expect that to intensify of like sort of other players in the chess world, like looking at this and saying like, wait, we've got this world championship title and like nothing's happening. You're not seeing anything about this, like, right? Like I feel like there's some tension there.
Yeah, for sure. Like when Bobby Fischer was the world champion, chess just exploded in America because he had the title of world champion. But like you're saying, like chess has grown despite the world championship, not because of the world champion. So like I wonder if we could lean into something like if Hikaru won the world championship, I think that would just completely explode chess in a whole new way. Yeah, and hopefully they get the next world championship tournament at a decent time so we can at least follow it. That was unfortunate.
Yeah, exactly. I always like I think that as big as chess is, it could be even bigger because, right, you hear these things about like chess is hard to sell or hard to market, but I don't know, like whenever I turn on the TV, there's a chessboard in every commercial,
Yeah.
even if it makes absolutely no sense. So I'm like, well, it seems like there's a lot of brands that would love to be associated with chess. So I think with the right faces, with the right people, I think like lots of people would love to play chess. Lots of people would love to learn about chess. Lots of companies would love to be associated with chess. So I think there's still a lot of like untapped potential.
Yeah, and chess is like the brand of chess overall is just associated with like being polite, being gentlemanly, and like it's an intellectual game. So like I don't know, you think people would want to align with that over like Fortnite, right? I don't know.
I think along that dimension too, I'd also love to see like more tournaments sort of picking up that theme because like we talked about this Alto tournament at least 21
Hmm.
at the Charlotte Chess Center, which is great. I think a lot of like other chess clubs could maybe look at that and do something similar because like especially post the Queen's Gambit, so many more people getting into chess as adults. So we're coming from a chess culture where it was pretty gritty and grungy. Really are not going to be playing in these tournaments or even know about them unless you've been like deep into chess since you were a kid. So I think the philosophy was kind of, hey, the people who are coming to these tournaments are going to tolerate pretty much anything to play chess. So, not a lot of like amenities or anything. But now that we've got more
Yeah.
people who are like adults who have like, like normal jobs and like families and stuff, it's like, hey, could I go to a chess tournament where like, I can get like a coffee or, hey, maybe there's
Right.
even like, I can go get a cocktail after the game or some, just kind of like hang out and have a nice experience. It's not just like, all right, I play 2 6-hour chess games per day, right? Get a
Yeah.
Chipotle, and then it's like same thing next day, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Right.
I think there's some room for that for like tournaments. It's like, hey, let's like a little bit more about the social experience than just about like all out chess 24/7.
There's a chess club in the Twin Cities in Minnesota called the Chess Castle, and it's like a historic chess club, the biggest chess club in Minnesota. And when I was a kid, my mom would take me there, and it was like above a pizza shop. And you'd go out, climb up this really long, narrow set of stairs, and half the players I don't think showered that day, maybe not that week, and people were out smoking in between moves. People were cussing left and right, and there was really only a couple other kids there, right? And everyone else, I mean, looked like chess was their thing. You know, it's like they didn't do much outside of going to that club, playing chess, and hanging out.
Yeah, I do. I mean, there's like a certain romanticism to that too, but I think chess is kind of moving away from that. Like I grew up in Ann Arbor, Michigan. The chess club in Ann Arbor at the time was in a basement. So yeah, kind of the same thing. It was yeah, just a different scene.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think we should also just have more for fun unrated tournaments just to kind of take the edge off a little bit and just, yeah, like socialize and hang out. Um, yeah, all right. Well, that is going to do it for this episode with Nate. Nate, thank you for joining us today. Do you have any openings for students you're taking on?
I do, yeah. So definitely, if anyone who is looking for a defense against D4 can check out this. This is going to be a group class I'm doing that's 6 weeks. That's starting soon. Or if people want to do a more personalized, where we really dig into your games and develop a study plan, I've got some openings for one-on-one as well. So I've got an application page for that we can share that link as well.
Cool. Awesome. We will be sure to include that. All right. All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining. Thank you, Nate, for joining. And we will see you all next week. Goodbye, everyone.